My name is Morgan Walker, and I am 32 years old, and I live in the beautiful but very hot city of Austin, Texas. I have lived here for most of my life, and I generally love the energy of the city, but sometimes the past has a way of catching up with you in the places you least expect it to happen. I work as a graphic designer for a small firm downtown, and I have spent most of my adult life trying to build a version of myself that is strong and confident, and nothing like the scared young girl I used to be back in high school. When I was a teenager, I was the target of a lot of bullying because I was quiet and I liked to read, and I did not really fit in with the popular crowds that ran the hallways of our school. One person in particular made my life a living nightmare, and his name was Brandon Miller. Brandon was the kind of guy who had everything handed to him on a silver platter because his family was very wealthy and lived in one of those huge houses in the suburbs with a long, winding driveway and a swimming pool in the back. He was an athlete, and he was handsome in a very generic way, and he used every ounce of his social power to make sure I felt like I was less than nothing. He would trip me in the hallway and laugh when my books went flying across the floor, and he would call me names that I still do not like to repeat even to this day. He once took my backpack and threw it into the school dumpster just because he thought it would be funny to see me cry while I tried to fish it out. I graduated, and I thought I was done with him forever, but life has a funny and sometimes cruel way of bringing people back into your orbit when you are least prepared for it to happen. About 5 years after we finished high school, I was out with a group of people who I considered to be my close friends at the time. We were at a popular bar on Rainey Street, which is a famous area in Austin, where people go to drink and listen to music and have a good time on the weekends. It was a humid Saturday night, and the air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and spilled beer and wood smoke from the nearby food trucks. I was finally feeling like I had a handle on my social anxiety, and I was enjoying a cocktail with my friends Sarah and Mike and Chloe. We were laughing and talking about our jobs when suddenly a loud voice boomed from behind us, and my blood turned to ice in my veins because I recognized that voice instantly. It was Brandon Miller. He had spotted my group, and he walked over with a big arrogant grin on his face like he owned the entire street. I expected my friends to see the look of pure terror on my face and realize that this was someone I did not want to be around, but instead they did the exact opposite of what I hoped they would do. They welcomed him into our circle with open arms because Brandon was the kind of person who could turn on the charm when he wanted something, and he immediately started buying rounds of drinks for the entire table. He sat down right next to me, and I could feel the heat radiating off of him and the smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of whiskey. Throughout the entire night, he did not miss a single opportunity to mock me. He brought up stories from high school that I had spent years trying to forget, and he told them in a way that made me look like the punchline of a very long and very mean joke. He would lean in close and whisper things to me that only I could hear, and then he would laugh loudly and clap Mike on the shoulder like they were best friends. I took the high road, and I just sat there and took it on the chin because I did not want to be the person who ruined the night for everyone else. I kept telling myself that I was an adult now, and that his words could not hurt me anymore, but deep down, I felt like that small, scared girl in the hallway again. About 3 hours into the evening, we were all starting to get pretty wasted because the drinks had been flowing nonstop. Brandon started to get a little bit more honest as the alcohol took away his filter, and he began to complain about his life. He talked about how he had shared custody of his young son and how much he absolutely hated his ex-wife and how she was trying to take all of his money. I felt a tiny bit of satisfaction knowing that his life was not as perfect as he pretended it was, but I still wanted to get away from him as fast as I could. I stood up and told the group I was going to the bathroom just so I could have a few minutes of peace and quiet. When I returned to the table, a few minutes later, the conversation had taken a very dark and very strange turn. Brandon was leaning forward and speaking in a low voice, but he was not being very careful about who heard him. He was casually talking about how he was moving methamphetamine in the community. At first, I did not believe him at all because he came from such a wealthy family, and I just thought he was trying to act like a tough guy or a wannabe gangster from the suburbs. He was acting like he was some kind of big-shot criminal who was untouchable because of his family name and his connections. A moment after he finished talking about his drug-dealing business, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, and I said something along the lines of I am feeling tired, and I think I might head home soon. Brandon immediately launched back into his high school bully mode, and his eyes turned cold and mean. He started calling me every kind of slur you can imagine, and he began flicking peanuts from a bowl on the table at my face. He was laughing while he did it, and my friends just sat there like they were watching a movie. I finally reached my breaking point, and I stood up and looked him right in the eyes, and I told him that he was still a bully, and that he was still a terrible person, and I used a very strong curse word to describe him. He got very offended, and he fixated on the fact that I had used that word against him like he was some kind of saint who had never heard bad language before. He started screaming at me so loudly that the music in the bar seemed to fade into the background. He was making a huge scene, and eventually, the security guards came over and asked him to leave the bar because he was being aggressive and disruptive. For about 15 minutes after he was kicked out, I sat with my friends, and I tried to explain to them how awful he had been to me in school. I told them about the dumpster and the name calling, and the way he had made me feel like I did not deserve to exist. To my absolute horror and anger, my friends claimed they were totally unaware of any of this, which made me even more furious, because they were definitely there for some of those incidents back in the day. They were gaslighting me and making me feel like I was the one being dramatic. As we finally left the bar to go home, I went to the sidewalk to order a ride-sharing service on my phone, and that is when I saw him. Brandon was waiting for me near the corner of the building, and he looked like he was full of pure, unadulterated rage. He started yelling slurs at me again, and before I could even react or run away, he stepped forward and grabbed me. He put me in a headlock, and he began to choke me. I could not breathe, and the world started to go dark around the edges of my vision. I felt his arms tightening around my neck, and I was terrified that he was actually going to kill me right there on the street. I lost consciousness for a few moments, and when I woke up, I realized I was lying on the cold, hard pavement. Brandon was standing over me, and he was actually urinating on me while he laughed. My friends were standing just a few feet away in a state of total shock, and they did absolutely nothing to stop him or to help me get up. I was humiliated and I was furious, and I felt completely powerless in a way that I had never felt before in my entire life. When I finally got home, after a very quiet and awkward ride, I could not sleep at all. I sat in my shower for an hour trying to scrub the feeling of him off of my skin, but the mental stain was much harder to wash away. I was so disturbed by the fact that someone could be so cruel, and even more disturbed that my friends had been so unwilling to help me when I was being attacked. I spent an entire week stewing on it and replaying the events over and over again in my head like a horror movie that would not end. I felt like a victim all over again, and I hated that he still had this much power over my emotions. But then a thought dawned on me, and it started as a small spark in the back of my mind. He had said he was moving methamphetamine. He had bragged about it in front of a group of people like it was a badge of honor. Now, for the record, I have never liked the police, and I generally try to avoid having anything to do with them, but I realized that I had no other power to exert over this piece of scum. He was a dangerous person who was poisoning the community, and he had physically assaulted me and gotten away with it. I decided that I was not going to let him win this time. I sat down at my computer, and I did some research to find out exactly where he was living. It was not hard to find, because he was the kind of person who posted everything about his life on social media. I called the non-emergency line for the Austin Police Department, and I told them his full name and the specific suburb he lived in. I told them that he had bragged about selling methamphetamine to people in the community, including kids, and that he seemed to be moving a large quantity of it. I gave them as much detail as I could remember from his drunken rambling at the bar. After I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. I waited for weeks, and I heard absolutely nothing back from the authorities. I started to think that maybe they had ignored my tip, or that Brandon was too well connected for anything to actually happen to him. I tried to move on with my life, and I stopped hanging out with that group of friends who had watched me get assaulted without lifting a finger. I realized that they were not really my friends if they could stand by and watch something like that happen. I focused on my work, and I tried to put Brandon Miller out of my mind once and for all. About 2 months later, I was scrolling through social media on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I saw a post being shared in our old high school group chat. My heart stopped when I saw the headline. Brandon Miller had been arrested after a massive raid on his home. The news story was very detailed, and it mentioned that the police had found a significant amount of methamphetamine and several illegal weapons in the house. But the part that really hit me hard was the mention that his young son was in the house at the time of the raid. At that specific point, a wave of guilt overcame me that I was not expecting to feel. I realized that my actions had directly led to a situation where a child was removed from his home and his father was taken away in handcuffs. I had impacted that child's life forever, and that is a very heavy burden to carry. I try to remind myself every single day that a child should never have been in a house where drugs and weapons were being kept in the first place, and that Brandon was the one who put his son in danger by choosing to be a criminal. I tell myself that the child is probably safer now away from a man who thinks it is okay to choke women and brag about selling poison. The guilt is still there, but it sits alongside a very strong sense of justice. To my knowledge, Brandon is still in prison because the sheer quantity of methamphetamine they found was enough to qualify for a very long sentence, and the weapons they discovered were eventually linked to other serious crimes in the area. He thought he was untouchable because of his money and his family name, but in the end, his own big mouth and his inability to stop being a bully were his downfall. I sometimes think about that night at the bar and the feeling of the cold pavement under my back and the humiliation I felt when he stood over me. I think about how he spent his whole life making other people feel small so that he could feel big. He finally ran into someone who was willing to fight back in a way he never expected. I do not feel bad about the fact that he is behind bars where he can no longer hurt anyone else. I have a new life now with better friends who actually care about my well-being and a sense of peace that I worked very hard to earn. I have learned that the high road is not always about staying quiet and taking the abuse. Sometimes the high road is about making sure that people face the consequences of their actions so that they cannot continue to ruin the lives of others. I still have the news clipping saved on my computer as a reminder that I am no longer that scared girl from the hallway. I am a woman who knows how to protect herself and her community. And as mean as it might sound, I really am looking forward to the day when I can finally put all of this behind me completely, but until then, I find a little bit of comfort in knowing he is exactly where he belongs. The world is a little bit safer without Brandon Miller walking the streets of Austin, and I am the one who made sure of that. I spent years feeling like I was a victim of his whims and his cruelty, but now the power dynamic has shifted forever. He is in a cell, and I am free to live my life exactly how I want to. I have started going to therapy to deal with the trauma of the assault and the years of bullying, and it has helped me realize that I am not responsible for Brandon's choices. He chose to sell drugs, and he chose to keep guns, and he chose to be a violent person. All I did was hold up a mirror to his life and let the rest of the world see what was really there. My new friends are the kind of people who would never stand by and watch me get hurt, and they have helped me rebuild my confidence. We go out to different parts of the city, now far away from Rainy Street, and I feel a sense of security that I thought I had lost forever. Every time I see a police car or hear about a drug bust in the news, I am reminded of the secret I carry. It is a heavy secret, but it is also a source of strength for me. I am not a person who seeks out conflict, and I do not want to hurt people, but I will also not be a doormat for the rest of my life. The lesson I learned is that bullies only have power as long as you are afraid of them, and once you stop being afraid, they have nothing left. Brandon Miller found that out the hard way, and I hope his son grows up to be a much better man than his father ever was. I hope the boy is in a home now where there is love and safety and no methamphetamine on the kitchen table. That is the only thing I truly hope for when it comes to the fallout of my revenge. As for Brandon, I hope he has a lot of time to sit in that cell and think about the girl he used to trip in the hallway and the woman he thought he could humiliate on a sidewalk in Austin. He was wrong about me, and he was wrong about what he could get away with. The justice system took a long time to catch up with him, but it finally did, and I was the one who made the call. It is a strange feeling to know that you have the power to change someone's life so drastically, but I would do it again in a heartbeat if it meant stopping a man like him. My life in Texas is good now, and the sun feels a little brighter every day. I am moving forward, and I am never looking back. I have tied up the loose ends of my past, and I have buried the ghost of the girl I used to be. I am Morgan Walker, and I am a survivor, and I am finally at peace with my story. The revenge was not just about the drugs or the arrest, it was about reclaiming my dignity and showing the world that even the quiet ones have a voice that can roar when it needs to. I do not have to worry about running into him at a bar ever again, and that is a gift I gave to myself. The fear is gone, and in its place is a quiet, steady strength that I carry with me everywhere I go. I have learned that true power does not come from bullying others, or having a lot of money, or being the loudest person in the room. True power comes from doing the right thing even when it is hard, and even when it makes you feel a little bit guilty at first. I am proud of the person I have become, and I am proud of the way I handled the biggest challenge of my life. Brandon Miller is just a name in a news report now, and I am a woman with a bright future and a heart that is finally starting to heal. The streets of Austin are wide and full of possibilities, and I am ready to explore every single one of them without looking over my shoulder ever again. I have turned my pain into a purpose and my fear into a weapon of justice. And that is the best kind of revenge anyone could ever ask for in this life. I will continue to work hard and love my life and be the best version of myself possible, because that is the ultimate victory over people like Brandon. He wanted to break me, but instead he only made me realize how unbreakable I actually am. The story of Morgan Walker is no longer a tragedy, it is a triumph of the will and a testament to the fact that what goes around truly does come around in the end. I am satisfied with the outcome, and I am ready to close this chapter of my life forever. I will live well, and I will be happy, and I will never let anyone make me feel small ever again. That is my promise to myself, and it is a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my days.